Спасибо. Я позволю себе...
Thank you. Allow me to make a brief opening statement, and then I will try to take all of your questions, dear ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to start by thanking our colleagues and guests for our joint work. Throughout those days at plenary meetings of the summit, at bilateral meetings, we felt that all of our partners were business-minded, open to constructive dialogue, committed to achieving our common goals of enhancing cooperation in the APEC region. Unfortunately, as you know, recently a number of tragedies happened in the People's Republic of China. Lives were lost because of an earthquake. Many were injured. Once again, on behalf of Russian authorities and Russian people, I would like to express my condolences to those that lost their loved ones. Wish good health to those that suffered. I could see that our friend Hu Jintao was really concerned, and he was constantly monitoring and dealing with the problems. He had to be distracted from discussion of the agenda, but that's what life is. Expanding cooperation with our Asia-Pacific region neighbors is one of the priorities of Russia's foreign policy. Russia's presidency theme this year is integrate to grow, innovate to prosper. In our efforts to steer the work of the organization during our presidency, we tried to be guided by the current priorities and issues that will be relevant tomorrow. We tried to identify such areas where our efforts to enhance leading role of APEC economies and global economy to be most efficient, to create additional sources of sustainable growth. We believe we have successfully achieved goals that were formulated ahead of Vladivostok summit. We were able not only to achieve continuity in APEC's work, but open up new horizons and, importantly, send positive messages to business circles. When our colleagues, Asian colleagues, decided to create this format many years ago, they made the right choice. It was a useful initiative, and over the past few days, we learned once again that it is a very useful forum to exchange views and try find solutions to challenges we're all facing. The main outcome of the summit is APEC Economic Leaders Declaration that reflects results of the forum's work during Russian presidency, formulates agenda for the future. Historically, APEC was set up to encourage mutual trade and investment. The philosophy of the forum is to lift barriers, encourage openness of markets, encourage fair competition. Russia believed it was important to step up joint efforts to promote this process, move it forward, especially today that all of us want to see global economy overcome the threat of recession and achieve the trajectory of sustainable and long-term growth. Vladivostok summit had once again reaffirmed APEC economy's commitment to the underlying principles of free trade and integration. Russia also suggested to perform monitoring of environmental policy measures that might hamper trade. An important achievement was adoption of the list of environmental goods. Our efforts to implement arrangements to reduce duties on environmental goods was difficult, but at the end of the day, we managed to adopt a credible list of environmental goods that includes 54 items, groups of goods. Ladies and gentlemen, let me note that under the umbrella of WTO, similar efforts have already taken more than 10 years, so far with no results. While we were able to achieve this breakthrough in just a few months, although finalization and this list of environmental goods was finalized during the meeting. Another important point is that APEC leaders unilaterally supported further regional integration, economic integration. Russia is determined to actively participate in those processes. We are participating in drafting FTA agreements. APEC leaders recognized the importance of full transparency of multilateral and bilateral FTA agreements in the region. It was Russia's initiative to draft and approve a so-called modal chapter to be incorporated in FTA agreements that mandates member states to disclose in advance information on the content of preferential agreements. When we acceded to the WTO, we promised and committed to fully disclose such information, and I believe that when FTA areas are set up, that would also be very handy if participants could provide full information about the conditions and preferential arrangements. Development of regional and economic integration is our strategic choice, and we will be implementing those arrangements in accordance with the coordinated goals of our partners, the customs union, single economic space, with view to our future efforts to set up Eurasian Economic Union. By the way, I want to reaffirm that at the summit we're guided not only by Russia's approach, by coordinated position of the Troika, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. By the way, you might have heard certain APEC countries are already showing practical interest in establishing special relations, such as free trade areas, with the customs union and the single economic space. We are starting practical negotiations with some of those countries. We also believe that coordination of integration efforts in Eurasian and Asian space would be to the benefit of all. In the future, we could speak about building fruitful dialogue between the participants of the Eurasian Economic Union that is now being established and APEC. Cooperation is possible with other regional associations. During the summit, we affirmed the importance of taking joint steps to improve supply chains, to eliminate choke points that remain at that limit flow of goods. We suggest to use transit potential of our country to diversify regional and global supply chains and create new, shorter, more profitable routes that would link Asia-Pacific region and Europe, both across the continental part of Russia and via the North Sea route. When talking about investment cooperation, we noted the need to share best practices to protect investments. This is yet another topic we discussed. A review of such practices has been made, and they're going to be implemented in all APEC economies. Another important area of our work is food security. Let me note that partners endorsed Russian suggestions aimed at enhancing stability of food market, expanding access to foods for more vulnerable social groups. We spoke about the need to attract investments and introduce innovative technologies to agriculture, the need to combat illegal production and trafficking of marine bioresources. By the way, in Los Cabos in Mexico, the G20 meeting, myself and Japanese Prime Minister agreed that we are going to sign an agreement to counter poaching. It's a very sensitive and important issue for us and Japanese partners. I note with satisfaction that during APEC summit we did sign such an agreement. All APEC economies are future-oriented, and it is innovations that hold the future. We are in favor of establishing single education space in the region, establishing comprehensive cooperation between relevant agencies, research institutes, educational facilities, and business circles. Among APEC achievements in the year 2012, we can list implementation of initiatives that would ensure closer cooperation between governments and businesses, creating public-private partnerships, policy partnership, and innovation and food security. On the eve of the APEC summit, we held many substantial discussions with members of Asia-Pacific Network of International Confederation of Trade Unions. I myself took part in one of such meetings in Moscow just recently. We discussed constructive and useful ideas particular, we spoke about how global crisis impacts labor market. We spoke about social responsibility of the state and the business. Trade unions want to have more influence on the work of APEC and participate in the drafting of the outcome declaration. I promised my colleagues from trade unions, and I informed my fellow leaders at the today's summit about the initiative of trade unions, and we agreed to build closer cooperation with trade union leaders. And Indonesian presidency, with our support, shall not only take on board the desire for greater cooperation expressed by trade union leaders, but also host ministerial meeting for labor ministers. Thus, trade unions will have real influence on the agenda and outcome documents of APEC. Russia is ready to share its experience such as relevant for Asia-Pacific region as preservation of biodiversity. Our experience in combating trafficking of endangered species. Partners have shown strong interest to our programs and projects to protect a number of endangered species. Not only tiger, leopard, we also spoke about other animals. We see great potential for cooperation. Environmental protection have strong economic dimensions. For instance, we need to focus on clearing riverbeds, border riverbeds. It is an important environmental problem that has a strong economic dimension. Generally, under Russian presidency in APEC, we held over 100 different events. We hope that they not only demonstrated to our partners technological investment potential of Russia, but helped them to learn more about culture and traditions of our people. We have proven in action that our adherence to ideals and goals of APEC, we stand ready to continue constructive cooperation with all partners. In 2013, we're handing over presidency in APEC to Indonesia, and we sincerely welcome our Indonesian colleagues and friends and wish them every success and wish them fruitful work. In conclusion, I would like to give special thanks to the people of Vladivostok, those who live in Primorsk region. Thank you, dear friends, for your cordial hospitality, for your great contribution to preparation of APEC summit. The success of the forum is our common success, success of Vladivostok and people of the region. We shall definitely continue developing and improving living conditions. The Far East Siberia, we will be making full use of active involvement initiatives of the people of our country and try fully tap new prospects that integration and partnership with Asia-Pacific neighbors open up. That concludes my opening remarks. Your question, please. Dear friends, we only have 40 minutes for the news conference. That means you have half an hour for a Q&A session. Please raise your hand, and I suggest I start with a question from TV channel Russia, who was host broadcaster of the summit. Today, at the summit, we often heard from media, delegation members, heads of state, but we want to know your view as a host, leader. Did you enjoy the summit, not just in terms of substance, but in terms of conditions, organizational conditions? I did indeed, because my guests were very interesting, very constructive, very pleasant to deal with. Those are true leaders of their countries and economies, great experts in economics, politics, and experience of cooperation, communication with those such people is always enriching. The spirit of discussion was very constructive. Our guests, leaders of APEC economies, appreciated greatly our idea to host APEC economies leaders not in a five-star hotel, but in a university campus. They appreciated the fact that we used public resources not to construct palaces, but instead built a new federal education and research center at the top international level, and they really enjoyed being the first guests of those premises. As regards the substance of the summit, I want to note that all of us, myself included, my colleagues, ministers of the Russian government, we were, of course, the hosts, but we acted in accordance with the spirit and the desire of our APEC partners to bring to the discussion those matters that are most important, most relevant at this moment in time, according to our colleagues. So once again, in terms of venue, in terms of arrangement, working conditions, those are very good, maybe a little modest conditions, but they're very decent at the top modern level, both in terms of technologies and the setting, equipment, design of the premises. And I want to thank all of you that worked on the preparation of the summit, technical experts, building workers, volunteers. But if I'm not mistaken, I'll have a chance to meet them and thank them specifically because they did a really great job. And it was noticed by the guests. I want to stress that. They noticed and appreciated, and they asked me to thank you on their behalf. Most important, of course, is the substance. Our work was constructive. We have specific results, and I'm satisfied fully with the outcomes of the work. Will I continue in Reuters, please? Vladimir Vladimirovich, during the summit, you spoke a lot about free trade and protectionism. At the same time, Russia, together with its major trading partner, European Union, oftentimes engages in some sort of a cold trade war. In that respect, how could you comment on an investigation that the European Commission is doing in respect of Gazprom? And statements were here from certain European officials saying that Russia should lift import duties and certain other duties. Are you going to be employing WTO mechanisms? Well, I would disagree with you in your assessment of our relations with the European Union. Our relations are very constructive, very positive. And we're not talking about trade wars or any economic hostilities. The investigation that is currently underway in the case of Gazprom is nothing new. Last year, certain Gazprom offices abroad were searched. This is the next step in the investigation. We, of course, are not happy with what is happening for economic reasons, because we're talking about Eastern Europe, as far as I understand, and I'm not fully aware at what is currently happening. The problem is as follows. The problem is that back in the days, European Union committed to subsidize economies of its member states. To a large extent, EU subsidizes economies of Eastern European states. Probably it is at this moment in time that someone in the European Union decided to shift part of the burden, subsidies burden, to us. United Europe wants to preserve its political influence and want us to pay for it. This isn't constructive, for one thing. Secondly, There are technological reasons. Back in the Soviet days, the existence of the Eastern Bloc, Soviet Union used to supply to those countries energy for non-market values, non-market prices. You couldn't describe that as market relations, or market-driven relations. Later on, we started to cooperate on the basis of market principles, and the pricing formula has been changed and became market-oriented. I believe we need to be guided by the realities of today. Modern Russia never committed and is not planning on undertaking additional commitments that would help to regulate economies of those countries through non-market measures. Thirdly, we've had in place for decades certain pricing principles. They are inscribed in long-term contracts. No one ever questioned those principles. I understand that in crisis times, when there is strong desire to shift financial burden to somebody else's shoulders, there is such a temptation. But once again, I do not think it is constructive. I sincerely hope that through business-oriented, friendly dialogue, I want to highlight it, friendly dialogue between our economic entities, Russian companies, and European Commission, we would be able to find solution, way out of the situation, with no damage done to either country, to either side.
Давайте агентство Life News.
Life News, please.
Здравствуйте, Владимир Владимирович. По разным оценкам подготовка.
According to different estimates, the preparation costs of the summit amounted to 600 billion. Do you think these resources are too costly and wasteful, and will we be able to justify these resources in the future? I don't know what to tell you right now. What answer could be to this question? But please don't hold grudge against me. What are you talking about? What are you saying? What 600 billion rubles are you implying? 300 billion were used to create the gas pipeline system running from Sakhalin to Vladivostok. Let me emphasize that it is not an export pipe. It is the gas transportation system to supply gas to the Primorsky region. What does it have to do with the preparation for the APEC? Maybe to a certain extent it has to do with that. But the goal is to supply gas to the region. That's the first point. The second point is that you know that you have created the utility water supply systems. We have expanded the runway. We have created new fueling facilities. A new railway station was built. 3 roads were constructed. I've mentioned the construction of the 3 bridges, which we have accomplished as well. We invested into other infrastructure objects, which even have nothing to do with the Ruski Island. They have to do with Vladivostok and the Primorsky region. Some problems are not that obvious, let's say the utilities problem. You know what's happening to the bay here and what sediments have accumulated on the shores and on the bottom, on the seabed of this bay. To make the ocean clear itself, we had to do that, and we had to invest in the infrastructure projects, and it helps us develop the region in the longer term. I was told more than once that it's not expedient to build such a huge runway because there are not so many flights operated here, but I'm sure that now even this runway won't be enough because more and more flights are appearing as soon as the new infrastructure is built. That's where we invested most of the money. Speaking about the preparation for the summit itself, even here, most of the investments were used to build the campus, but we all understand that, and I've mentioned that already, that to to organize the summit. Any venue could be chosen, and it could have been much cheaper, but then there won't have been any federal university. We wouldn't have created such an intellectual dominant power in the Far East. And I think that we should make such investments to implement such projects. Speaking about the development of East Siberia and Far East, we should start with the intellectual piece, and it requires necessary funds. And I'm convinced that it will be so in the future. Now, another major goal is to add intellectual substance to the walls, to these premises. But we've got Far East Federal University. On the basis of this university, we could continue working. We could attract experts from other countries. We could set other large-scale goals. Another waste has to do with the preparation for the summit and in the field of security of this event. And even here, we invested into purchasing equipment for special services and law enforcement bodies. How will this equipment be used? Will be discarded? No, it will be used for the purposes of these various services. They will be used to hold Olympic Games in Kazan, University Games in Kazan, for Olympic Games in Sochi, for organizing G8 and G20 at other regions of Russia. Nothing is in vain. We've got a good heritage due to the APEC summit. Certain money should have been invested for organizational arrangements, but I think that these costs were minimum, and total costs are fully justified. Let's proceed. Are there any other questions? Please, let's give floor to the CCTV, to our colleagues from China. Please give them the floor. Distinguished Mr. President, thank you. We're grateful for your condolences due to the earthquake in China. What areas could be used for attracting investment from China to develop the Far East? And the second question is there are lots of young people in the Far East who would like to leave this region. What measures are undertaken by the government of the Russian Federation to encourage young people to stay in the region? Thank you.
Значит, первое по поводу возможных сфер приложения.
As for other areas which could be used to attract the Chinese investment, I can say that these areas could be very diverse. First and foremost, we would like, as I have mentioned, to work with our partners, including our Chinese partners, on innovative technologies, on the technologies of the future. Let me draw your attention to the fact that the Far East region includes such clusters that were created long ago, and they have certain capabilities for growth. Or these clusters are also established and they are being reorganized and revitalized. Let's say the ship manufacturing industry. Companies here are created with the participation of the Chinese capital. I know that our colleagues from Hong Kong are present here. The second such enterprise is going to be created with the participation of the Korean capital. That's the first area of work. There's some other potential to create aviation equipment manufacturing companies. Now, together with our Chinese partners, we are considering the opportunity of working in two areas of aviation manufacturing creation. First one is the creation of the large helicopter based on the Russian technologies. This helicopter was appreciated by our Chinese colleagues when it was used to eliminate the consequences of the earthquake which took place a couple of years ago. These are the largest helicopters in terms of their capacities. They can lift 20 tons. And together with our Chinese colleagues, we decided to work on designing similar helicopters. Thus, we could think of establishing such companies in the Far East region. Now we're working on the creation of the wide-bodied aircraft together with China. We know that this task is very difficult, and you know that two companies, EADS and American Boeing, dominate on this market, but we have to do our best to find our own niche based on open and transparent competition. Technological capabilities of Russia, including financial, intellectual resources of China, give all reasons to us to believe that we'll be able to cope with that. And now, energy sector. I have to say that some nuclear facilities of Russia are located in the Eastern Siberian region, and you know how active Russian Federation is in China. We count on future cooperation, bearing in mind not only production, but also the scientific aspect, scientific dimension of this work. We've got the Siberian Research Institution, where people are actively involved in the promotion of innovative technologies. And I really hope that on the territory of the Far East and here in this new educational center, experts will pay particular attention to this very problem. And now, speaking about hydrocarbons, energy sector as a whole, I will just mention that there are huge opportunities for further growth. Other questions, please? Interfax. Good afternoon. Vladimir Vladimirovich, you've mentioned more than once that Europe is our major trade and economic partner. But due to the current situation in the Eurozone and recession in Europe, don't you think that we should transfer the development of trade economic relations to the Asia-Pacific region, at least partially, and take into account the meltdown in the Eurozone? Don't you think that we should reduce Russian reserves in euro and preserve these reserves in rubles or some other currencies? The first question was to shift the balance towards the Asia-Pacific region. Nothing is to be created artificially. It happens actually in reality by itself. Now, the trade turnover of Russia with Europe is 51%, as well as the trade turnover with Asia-Pacific region is 24%, although the capabilities for economic growth in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of trade turnover is going to increase. It doesn't mean that we have to remain idle and just watch what's happening in the world. Understanding the current developments, we should adapt to these processes. We should prepare. Are we doing that? Yes, we are. We are expanding infrastructure capabilities. We expand the throughput of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, Baikal-Amur main line. We are going to expand the port economy of the region. We will develop additional energy resources. We will develop hydropower to create industrial clusters on our territory. A lot of work is to be done, and we are going to move in that direction. That's the key priority for Russia's development as a whole and for the development of this very region. As for the Eurozone, I can say there are lots of serious problems. We were discussing them for a while during our luncheon. Madame Lagarde made a statement on this issue, and we had lively discussions. Different points of view were expressed. Sometimes they were contradictory. These points of view cover the future situation in the Eurozone, since we mostly depend on the European continent, and we are sincere in our hopes that European partners will be able to overcome the difficulties they are facing right now. Is anybody else willing to ask questions? Off the radio, please. Good afternoon, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Lots of official events took place during the summit, but there were also some informal meetings. On the 7th of September, Igor Sechin celebrated his birthday. Yeah, that's substance for our today's press conference, but it is also the life of the summit. For sure, you were invited to this event. What did you give as a present to him, and how was the party organized? I was not invited to this celebration, even if it took place, you know, much more than I do. Then I would like to ask you where it took place, who participated in this event. Mr. Sechin didn't invite me. Too bad for him. You asked me what I gave him as a present, but now I feel guilty because I did not give him any presents, but now I have to do that, even if it's way over after the birthday. But I have to say that Sechin is very efficient in his work, and he's worth attention being paid. Now, RIA Novosti, please. Vladimir Vladimirovich, on the sidelines of the summit, you had more than 10 bilateral meetings. What are the results of these negotiations? You talked to Hillary Clinton. What did you discuss? Maybe she told you about the internal political situation in the US, taking into account the election campaign which is underway there. You know, even if she told me something about the internal political situation in the US, I do not feel entitled to tell the story to such a respected, substantial audience. I think that the Americans should have the right to decide what they are to tell to the media. Indeed, we had a short conversation on the sidelines of the summit. We talked for about 15-20 minutes. It was a very constructive conversation. We discussed our bilateral relations, trade, economic links, and some political issues. Of course, we discussed the situation in the hotspots in the world, in the Middle East, here in Asia. It was a very constructive, business-like conversation. I do not think that now it is time to go into details about this dialogue, because no agreements were achieved, no agreements were made, but it was a very useful dialogue. We just told each other about the positions of each other. I think it is very useful. Such conversations are very useful because they allow us to better understand each other, and maybe we'll be able to find joint solutions in the future. Now, please give the floor to our colleague from Japan. Vladimir Vladimirovich, yesterday there was the bilateral meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, Mr. Nord. How do you assess the results of this meeting? What do you think are the capabilities, the opportunities of the Russia-Japanese cooperation in this region? What are the long-term prospects, and what could be done to strengthen security for Russia and Japan? Japan is our long-standing partner, one of the key partners in the region. We know about the capabilities of the Japanese economy. We're aware of the problems and the potential of the Japanese economy. We are interested in developing relations with your country, and we would like to solve all outstanding problems which have historical roots. We discussed it yesterday as well. We also discussed the measures that could be undertaken in the nearest future. We agreed that Mr. Prime Minister will pay an official visit to Russia, where we will be able to discuss all these problems in detail, and not on the sidelines of the summit. We focused our attention on the economic issues, on Japanese investment into Russia and Russian investments into Japan, on the establishment of joint ventures with the participation of the Japanese capital. And Prime Minister expressed satisfaction on behalf of the Japanese business community with the way it is developing its activity in the Russian Federation, in different parts of the Russian Federation. In the northwest, you know, that we have some enterprises with Japanese participation there, and in the European part of Russia, Mazda has just opened its car assembly company enterprise here. That's the first foreign endeavor for this company. Toyota is here and very active in this region. But after the problems associated with the Fukushima incident, our colleagues pay particular attention to Russia's experience in the field of energy sector. We agreed to expand cooperation in this area. You know that Gazprom signed an agreement with the Japanese partners on liquefaction of natural gas. This project could turn into the big project in international points of view, because Japan is a huge consumer since it has limited natural resources. That's why we are going to assist Japan in this process. We are working with Japan on market conditions. Both our Japanese partners and ourselves are satisfied with the development of the Sakhalin project, and we are going to address all these problems. And I've mentioned it that in Los Cabos we agreed to sign an agreement on combating poaching and on fishery. We implemented this agreement. We signed it yesterday. It is a huge area for joint work. We develop this work not only with Japan, but also with Korea. We hold lots of negotiations devoted to fishing industry. We give quotas for the fishing. There is nothing new here. And I think I can tell it to the media representatives. So we insist on such a situation that this granting of quotas should be connected with the establishment of processing facilities on the territory of the Russian Federation. I think that this approach is fair enough.
Unfortunately, we have almost run out of time. I suggest we just have several concluding questions. Komsomolskaya Pravda, newspaper. Alexander Gamov, Komsomolskaya Pravda. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I have a question that has nothing to do with APEC. I'd like to ask you about cranes. Asian crane, those birds to which you showed the way to warmer habitat areas. So what is your view of the large number of rather sarcastic comments that have been made? A lot of things have been said and written, and many jokes have been made. Well, why talk about this? Just let them fly themselves. Your consistent opponent, Ksenia Sobchak, projected the entire situation to the electoral statistic. I'm not sure whether you know that, but 63% cranes followed Putin, as it turned out. And the rest preferred to go southward, and only a small number of birds stayed on the boulevards and in squares of the cities. I think a certain degree of truth, there is a certain degree of truth in these words. Not all of the cranes followed Mr. Putin. So this is my question. It's up to you to answer. Thank you. Applauses. I heard even applauses. Indeed, not all of the cranes followed me, but only weak ones. The weak ones didn't follow. And that was only first attempt. During the second attempt, all of them took off. in the air. To be true, I have to admit and to be frank with you, not all of the cranes flew, and the leader, the pilot, has to be blamed because he was too fast in gaining speed and altitude, and they were just lagging behind. They couldn't catch up with the flying vehicle. But that is not the whole of the truth. Simply during certain circumstances, when there is a strong wind and bad weather, the pilot has to lift very speedily, otherwise the vehicle, the flying machine, could overturn and capsize. What else can be said? There are certain birds that don't fly in flocks. They prefer to have their nest separately. But this is a different sort of problem. Even if they are not members of the flock, they are members of our population, and they have to be treated very carefully, to the extent possible, of course. Any questions, APEC-related questions? Are there still some questions left?
Информационное агентство «Восток».
Information news agency Vostok Media. First of all, Vladimir Vladimirovich, I have been for a long time in this profession. I'd like to thank the host, the organizer of the summit, for the conditions that have been afforded. Indeed, we have many things to compare with, and indeed this was up to the par. And as a resident of the Far East, I would like to ask you a question. I love this area, and I wouldn't travel anywhere from here, wouldn't go to reside anywhere else. Our region is huge, from Baikal to the Bering Strait. We believe that a certain status should be accorded to our region. That includes some tax breaks and tax vacations for innovative enterprises, some sort of customs preferential treatment terms that for enterprises that deal with resource production. What is your view of this idea? Well, we continue discussing this issue all the time and continue to think about creating conditions to promote accelerated rate for the development in these areas. There is large temptations to establish free economic zones in this area, but taking into account the talent of our people, we fear that the entire Russian economy would re-register to this area. There are some other ways to be pursued, and we have discussed one of them with Madam Nabiulna, and that includes providing preferential treatment terms to the so-called greenfield projects. We will give it some consideration. I'd like to ask the members of the government to provide their proposal on the subject. And there are also other opportunities and possibilities. Perhaps it's premature to discuss this publicly, because generally speaking, such things could be discussed publicly when they have been well developed and agreed upon. But you know, we have provided the preferential treatment in terms of taxation for mineral resource producing enterprises, including the major costs of infrastructure they create. Here some ways to be pursued in other areas, including high-tech areas. For example, to set up favorable conditions for projects that are being implemented here. But there are also some other tools that could be employed. By the way, the program for the development of the Far East is one of the few regional programs for development, and we will, of course, extend this program. So let's conclude. So the last question at this press conference. TASS, the TASS news agency. Thank you, Mikhail Petrov, ITAR TASS news agency. Vladimir Vladimirovich, perhaps my question would follow up on what you have just said Concerning the projects that are at issue, you need investors to implement them. You have had an opportunity to discuss this issue with entrepreneurs during the APEC meetings, during the CEO summit. What is your impression? What is the sentiment in their environment among them? Are they optimistic or pessimistic in terms of global economy, the state of global economy, the state of Russian economy, and all these projects that are being discussed? Isn't there a risk that they will just stay on paper, or could they be really implemented? Well, here, and generally speaking, at APEC summits, we don't discuss specific projects. The summit is convened for something different, to check our watches, to see where we stand on the major issues of the region and the world economy at large. But in this context, of course, we could felt the sentiments of our colleagues from the Asia-Pacific region. And I must tell you that, of course, there is certain concern with respect to the current global economic trends, taking into account major problems that Europe is confronted with, and the United States also is confronted with major challenges, and the problems are similar. But this particular region of the world, the Asia-Pacific region, after all, and we have many times discussed this, and you have repeated that many times in mass media, this region is a locomotive, a driving force for the world economy. While in the Eurozone, we see the prospects of zero growth or even a recession. Here we are witnessing growth, significant growth. Of course, the growth rate is going down, but nevertheless, it is growth. And by and large, this state of affairs makes the leaders of the economies represented here to be optimistic rather than pessimistic. Today we have discussed the situation of rural economy. One of our colleagues, I wouldn't personify him, he said a very right thing. He said that the problems in the Eurozone are more to do with politics rather than the economic issues. I think this is the right statement, because the political system itself and the high level of social security networks, social networks, and impossibility to provide for the growing demand on the basis of the existing economic order. All this is a very heavy burden shouldered by the European economy. And in the Asia-Pacific region, this burden is significantly less. In the Asia-Pacific region, there is nothing like this paternalistic burden that exists in Europe. Here, all the economic actors, economic apparatus feel their responsibility for the situation in the social and economic sector. This is a very important political, economic, and psychological factor. Of course, this is speaking largely, at large, but the number of problems we face is much greater. But responding to your question, I'd like to stress, by and large, the sentiments in this particular region is rather positive, and expectations, I would call them, are constrained, optimistic. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you raised your hand, but please promise that no one else would raise their hand. Since you have done so, you can ask your question. Please, go ahead. Yes. Give the microphone to the guy. Anton Zhelnov, the Dosh Rain TV channel. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I'd like to thank you for the organization of the meeting here on the Rusk Island. But I'd like to ask whether you have had an opportunity to make some sightseeing in the city. If you did so, you saw some fresh paint on the facades of the buildings, some barracks concealed by masking devices. But we living in this city have never seen like this before, and people complained. So what would be your reaction to this, whether there will be any additional federal allocations made to ensure urban development, because people would be afraid if they walk in some backyards of the city? Well, this is an important issue, and I thank you for raising it. And let me explain why this is a good question. I've already mentioned, and if some colleagues didn't hear, let me repeat. The city of Vladivostok and the nearby territories historically have been a closed city, a restricted area, and it could be only conditionally called a city. That was a naval base, military base, and no foreigners could enter this area. But from the point of view of social development, nothing happened here. For decades, everything remained static, and the construction was very modest, and it was in the condition of degradation. And now the first initial attempts are being made to drastically change the situation. It was not enough to open the city. We have to develop it. Of course, it deserves it in terms of its geographical position, in terms of its importance for the future of Russia. And this is why the decision was made to hold the APEC meeting not in the city of St. Petersburg or in Moscow. We could do that easily. But the decision was taken to hold the summit in the Asian part of Russia, in particular in this city of Vladivostok, in order to help to develop its infrastructure. And these are just initial steps to develop and reinvigorate the city, just initial steps. And I must tell you that even here, everything looks beautiful, but I know that after tomorrow's rain, there is some problems with drainage, with water supply. Actually, we have been working on a construction site which needs to be completed. But the volume of work to be carried out is huge, and therefore it is normal from that perspective. And with respect to the Vladivostok, again, these are just initial steps being taken. And as you know, the situation in the eastern Siberia is the same. Along the Baikal-Amur Railroad is the same. People still continue to live in barracks, have very poor living conditions. They were promised better living conditions, but they were fooled, and they still live with the same legacy that has existed for decades. People were left to fend for themselves in those barracks, and they have no right to apply for improved housing because the barracks they live in are not considered houses, living quarters. Here, the situation is different from the Baikal-Amur area, but still there are many poor living conditions. Many areas have very poor conditions, but we have to think what measures need to be taken to help the city to develop. And first of all, investment should be made to develop the infrastructure, but a large part of works to be done should be shouldered by municipal and regional authorities. Let me repeat once again, it is our intention to support them, and we will support them, but significant amount of work needs to be done at these levels of authority. And the most important thing that needs to be done, we have to create here highly qualified jobs to seek to achieve a high level of living conditions and to use their purchasing power to resolve the problems with housing by building new offices, new corporate buildings. Just yesterday, representatives of our major banks, after having had a look at what is happening here, the initial sprouts of the new development, they expressed their desire to participate in this process. We're building the Cosmodrome, the space vehicle launch pads. We will develop the car industry cluster. I have visited a plant built by the Japanese, and Solar's representatives has already informed me what they will be doing on that site. They will remove barracks and build new houses, and when new enterprises are built with a new level of production culture, new houses are built, the situation will continually improve for the better. This will be a progress, continued progress. But to do that, we have to improve the economic macroclimate, and we have to attract foreign investment here. And when we develop the production basis, social issues will also be resolved. For its part, the government will have to make investments in the development of social infrastructure, medicine, education, public health institutions.
And this will take many years, probably decades. But I'm confident Russia must deal with this task, and we shall succeed. Thank you.